you alluded to just a moment ago the forward curve.
Yeah.
Right. And I know you don't have a crystal ball. I know you're not going to get up here and guarantee that rates are going to do this or that over the next 12 or 18 months. But I am curious to know, with your knowledge and experience, what do you see in the marketplace, rates today, tomorrow, 16, 18 months from now?
So I'm going to start off with what I'm hearing, and what I'm hearing is that we're not quite at the bottom yet, or at the top, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, the CDC is talking about raising by 25 basis points again before the end of the year. No idea with election year next year what they're going to do. It's very difficult. The banks are pulling back leverage currently. Expansion deal that underwrites at a 125 in year 2 at 70% leverage, they're offering 55.
And when you say 125, you mean debt service coverage ratio?
Correct. Yeah. You're not bothering me by stopping and asking for clarity. And the banks are still heavily looking for deposits. And so, state of the market, that's what I'm hearing, that's what I know. What I think is, I think there's still too much of a gap between the types of rates that you can get the indexes, which is attributing to the separation between buyers and sellers, which is why we have 70% decrease in volume of transactions this year. There's still too much of a separation between the two primary types of indexes, which is treasury style, the banks that lend off of treasuries and the banks that lend off of prime. I've kind of just followed this trend and kind of looked at the gap between this, and then hearing from the brokers and buyers of what's going on between buyers and sellers and the gap and the discount that they're actually executing at, et cetera. I think that gap closes. So you have, prime's at 8.5%. Most banks that are on prime are prime plus, right? It's just prime plus 0. Let's just start there, 8.5%. And then you've got treasuries, and we just executed a deal at Treasury, the UST plus 250, which is 2.5% on top of whatever that index is. And this was a 5-year, so it executed around, call it 7% at the time. That is a 1.5 difference. The seller is pricing their property based on hoping you can go and get, 6.5%, 7% money. But then you've got the tertiary market, out-of-state borrower, it's in South Carolina. All these other check boxes have started hitting on that deal, and it kind of removes the ability to go execute on that. Now you're looking at like a 7.5 and 8, and that's why the deal doesn't work, and you got to get a discount on the price. I think if treasuries start to come up, prime next year maybe comes down a hair, it's going to close that gap between what the interest rate is. Instead of it being a 1.5 to 2 point spread, it's a 0.5 point spread. Now you don't have as much of argument as on values and what the property's worth. And that's when I think transaction volume comes back. So that's what I think.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And it kind of layers nicely with the idea that some of you have heard me talk about in the past. It's like, guys, we're moving for the first time in a decade into a buyer's market again, right? The sellers have had the upper hand. We're moving into a buyer's market. The catch is the sellers don't know that yet, right? And our job is to try to convince them. Cody's speaking to the same thing. There's a delta between their perceptions and the reality of the lending markets and the greater industry reality, for lack of a better word. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I think the key is to understand that scale and what checkbox, tertiary market, out-of-state borrower, where does that push you, on that scale? That's the biggest question that I get from clients is, where's this interest rate going to be? And then I go through the list of questions and just what's all the crap on the deal that could be going against us first? That's what I want to know. So like primary and secondary markets are going to be at the lower end of that range. So let's take the range. I mean, treasuries plus 225 is probably the low end right now.
Okay.
Maybe 200 if you got a screaming deal in a primary market, which is right at like 675 right now. Right?
6.75 is the best rate we could expect.
665 and treasury plus 200. There's still credit unions out there that'll price it at like a 650 for a 40% levered refi. You know what I mean? But then on the high end, prime plus one is 9.5%. So 650 to 9.5% is a 3-point spread. Where am I going to fall in this range? And so primary, secondary markets, those are going to be at the lower end of the range. Secondary, tertiary markets, going to go up to the higher end of the range. Non-recourse, higher end of the range. Out-of-state borrowers, mid to high, is going to push you a little bit higher. Sub 1 million in a loan amount. The types of banks that service sub 1 million in a loan amount typically going to be kind of middle, maybe a little bit higher. They're not the most competitive. Most competitive guys are $2, $3, $4, $5 million minimums. Age of the property, determining your amortization. Adding expansion into the deal adds construction. Construction adds risk. Risk increases interest rate. Well, that makes sense.
It does. You guys following, tracking that? We've got the range from 6.5 to 9.5, and all of the factors and variables he just outlined are going to move you toward the low end versus high end. And I always ask the question, what else is happening here? What else can we learn? Based on what Cody just said, if you can buy a property, one of the places where we add value, we all know where we add value, right? We raise rents and we decrease expenses. Well, if we can take an $800,000 property, raise rents, do our thing, maybe expand, that's extra risk. When we take on risk, if it works out, we get rewarded higher. Well, maybe that $800K property is now a $2 million property. Well, based on what Cody just said, the $2 million property is going to command more of an appetite from lenders, which means that buyers can pay us more because their cost of money is less. Do you see how we then benefit from repositioning a property from a property that would be in the low end range? Now, we can't move it from a tertiary market to a secondary market, right? Like that's not within our control. But there are, among the variables he just listed, some that we can control, and we can move our asset and reposition it so that it garners more favorable lending terms, which is a way to bolster the value. And I know that sounds like, oh, that'd be cool, it'd be neat to happen. But if you compound that value increase on top of all the other things that we normally do, it's an exponential increase in your payday.